Okay, so we are gonna get started with Capture One. Color editing is what we're basically going to try to deal with today. So to get to the color editing portion of this, if you take a look at the icons that sit along the very top, it's the one that looks like the Olympic three rings. That's the one that we're actually gonna click on. Actually, I take that back. While we're here really quickly, I'm gonna take a quick jaunt out just to point something out to you guys. It's a little bit confusing, but I just want to give you some clarity. So go to the icon that looks more like the histogram. This is the actual exposure warning right here. Not exposure warning, but the exposure tab. So you've got your histogram that does have exposure warnings, all that kind of stuff in here. But the part that I wanted to point out to you is this right here under the exposure tab, the exposure tool in the exposure tool tab drop down. You'll see at the very bottom there's a saturation slider, and if you take a look, I'm going to actually work with this. There's a couple of, if you take a look in the session that we're actually have been working with, there's a lot of stuff that's actually got this girl in the parking lot in it. There's a couple of green screen pictures. There is a couple of weird, just random, really very colorful pictures in here. The one that I want to start to work on is it's a collection of a box of chalk. Drawing chalks. Can everybody find that part? We good on this part? All right, so if you take a look at the exposure tab in relative to this image, if you take a look at this saturation slider right here, if you click this and drive it all the way over, you don't really see much of a change that happens in here. And the reason that is that you'll get some change. So again, I'm clicking this over and dragging it over, and you'll see a small amount of change that happens in there. If you double click on this, the slider icon, it zeroes back out. What you'll notice about this is that it doesn't really do a heck of a lot. And the reason it's not doing a heck of a lot is that this, in my opinion, has actually been mislabeled. This shouldn't really be called saturation because they do have saturation in the color tab. But in this tab, this is much more like vibrance. And if you guys know how vibrance works in Photoshop, the way it's basically designed to work is that as you start to move the saturation slider up in Photoshop, in Vibrance, not the saturation slider, but the Vibrance slider in Photoshop, what it does is it looks at colors that are not very saturated and it saturates them, but the colors that are already really saturated, it lays off of those. It doesn't have anywhere near the same amount of impact. So you'll see that primarily all of these colors in here are saturated. So when we actually grab this saturation and crank it all the way up, you'll actually see very little shift in here because most of these colors are already fairly saturated. Or, like is in the case of these gray and white chalks down here, they have no color in them anyway. So there is nothing to saturate or desaturate. There's no hue actually in these guys. So that's why you're not seeing much of a change here. But the point that I want to make is that this saturation slider, it works independent of what's going on in the color editing tool tab. And anyway, just kind of an FYI to sort of give you guys some idea of what's going on. If we click on the tool tab, even on the basics tab right here, so clicking on the three ring, again, it's the color editing tool tab. If you click on this at the very top, you should have a histogram. Underneath this, you should have layers. It may be collapsed, so you can actually open this up. Underneath this, we have base characteristics. Then we have white balance. You guys have already been working on this because white balance shows up also in the exposure slider. Then we've got the color editor right here. Then down underneath that is color balance, then black and white, and then normalize. Normalize is actually a new one to me, so I'm not going to get into normalize. We probably won't even get into black and white. The rest of these we are going to actually go through. However, there's a saturation slider that exists right here as well. So I'm going to ask you to come into the three ring, into the color tab. So click on that, and then I'm just going to take a quick jump into saturation here so that you can see the difference. If you come down and open up the color editor, you'll see that there are three sub-tabs that sit in the color editor. There's a basic, there's an advanced, and there's a skin tone. Is everybody on board with all of this? We're all good on this part right here. So if you take a look at the Basics tab, that's where I want to start. You'll see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different colors. And then there is a sort of a total color. That's what this last one is about, where you can see multiple colors on that. This works really well for what it does, but these are all pre-established color ranges. So again, there's an analogy to this and what happens in Photoshop. When you go into Photoshop and you actually do a select based on color, so color range selection, they have pre-canned color ranges in there as well. So again, for what they're worth, they work well. I don't know many people who use this stuff because most people want to be more specific about something. However, if you click on the last of the tool of the color icons, the one is the multicolor icon. What this will show you, what this does is this will allow these controls to impact your entire image. If you select on one of them, like if I select just on the yellow one, the only thing it's going to actually impact will be the yellow, the yellow kind of reds, oranges, that sort of like that range of color. But so go ahead and click on the universal one, the one that actually covers all the colors. It's the small little color icon that's all the way to the right. And now when you grab saturation and crank it over, you see even less happening in here. So that's pretty interesting. And if I drop my saturation all the way down, and that is because I am on an adjustment layer, so hang on, I'm not in the same place you guys are. Let's try this again. So I just got rid of that adjustment layer part. So the saturated color part, if we click and then drag it all over, you can see it nukes out these colors. I mean, they like hyper saturate on here. I need to go back to my exposure version of this to show you the difference in that, because my exposure version was also using that single adjustment layer. If you don't know what adjustment layers are right now, don't worry, we're going to get to that part. But I'm going to go back to my exposure one now and do the saturation pull again, which will be on everything. And you can see it does saturate everything, but you don't end up with like nuclear blown out colors in here. They're certainly more saturated, but they're not, again, nuclear, for lack of a better way of putting it. So I'm going to go back now and do the same trick with the saturation slider in the basic panel and drag it all the way over. And you can see these actually do nuke out. This is actually much, much more saturated than the other ones were. So anyway, just to point that part out to you, if you're looking for a vibrant slider, it happens in the exposure panel right here as opposed to, but it's universal. You can be very specific about this using layers. Again, we'll get to layers in just a little bit. So anyway, back to this whole part right here. So the basic panel, we're going to blow through this pretty quickly, but before we get to that, what I do want to do is I want to start and kind of work our way from the top down. So to the extent that we are working with a default workspace, so again, for me, my workspace is the default workspace for this right now. If you actually come in, you already know that we can come in and we can add tools to this. We can get rid of tools. I've already told you guys, I do not use the histogram at all. I don't use this part. So if you wanted to free up space, you would actually simply click on these little three dots right here, and you could say remove this tool. You can customize your workspaces. So I just want everybody to realize that right now I'm working with a default space, so that when I talk about working from the top down, this is based on a default space and how the workflow would apply to that default space. If you go in and you move all of this shit around, let's say you move base characteristics all the way down to the bottom, it'll still work. There's no problem with that. It's just typically you would want to do this in the order starting from the very top and working your way down. So in our case, again, histogram means nothing to me. I don't really use it. I'm much more concerned about using color cards and being able to read the numbers off of color cards and doing that kind of work than I am actually doing this whole histogram part and trying to make judgments based on that. Also, I do a lot of work like this on white, and so if you take a look at a histogram of something like this, everything is all jammed up to the right-hand side because the image is dominated by light tones. That doesn't mean, though, this histogram, if people were basing their exposure evaluations and the image evaluation just based on this histogram, if you didn't see the image, you would look at this and say, well, there's something wrong. This is probably overexposed image is what this probably is. Truth of the matter is, it's just dominated by light tones. That's all it is. The exposure here is spot on. So anyway, that's why I don't use histogram, and for me, it's worthless information. If you use the histogram on the back, how many of you guys actually look at the histogram on the back of your camera? You shoot a picture and you look on the back? Yeah, that's also worthless, because the problem with that is that is actually then based on a JPEG that your camera actually generates. So when you shoot a picture, even if you're shooting only in RAW, your camera will capture in the RAW. But in order to give you a preview that has some meaning, it actually, your camera generates a JPEG, and then you're looking at a JPEG. Well, we already know that JPEGs have relatively small color spaces, relatively limited tonal range, that kind of stuff, whatever. And that's what you're basing your decisions on. So if you ever use highlight warning on your cameras, the problem with that again is that it's flagging a highlight that is blown out in a JPEG, not what is actually exists in your RAW file and what in all likelihood could be recovered in your RAW file. So the histogram on the back of cameras has a tendency to indicate overexposure for everything, which causes people to underexpose, and when you underexpose, you end up actually sacrificing data that actually describes your file. We have not gone over linear gamma in this class, right? Logarithmic, linear, capture, that kind of stuff. We did, where the whole thing about how the weight's in the hand, that kind of stuff. Okay, so then you guys, when I say that underexposure will actually really cost you when it comes to in terms of collecting the data for your image, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Remember, one stop underexposure is half of your data is gone. So anyway, that's another reason not to trust a histogram, certainly on a camera back. This layers underneath this, we are going to use this today. This is actually not a relatively new feature. This has been around in Capture One for 3 or 4 years now at least. But it's really, it changed the whole game for how you do work in Capture One in terms of pretty much anything. You can use layers to do exposure, you can do it to use color, you can do it to use a ton of things here. We'll take a look at that, but most of what we'll be doing today will actually be, the work will ultimately wind up in layers because it allows you to then turn things on and off. It also gives you an opacity control here, so we can make a color shift that would be on a layer, on an adjustment layer, and then be able to actually fine tune it using the opacity of it. We'll get to all of that. Background is the default layer. It's where we're actually going to start. But working our way from the top down, the first thing that I want to hit is base characteristics. So does everybody have base characteristics? Has everybody basically got this set of tools? Anybody not? Okay. If you have something wildly different, simply come up to your window menu, down to workspace, and come over to default. And it will give you, it'll get it back to the default. Defaults, I'm in Capture One 21. Defaults are specific to the version of Capture One that you're on. So your default, if you're working in 24 now, I think is the most recent one, it may look slightly different. If that's the case, just let me know. All right, so that being said, if you'll click on the little triangle next to base characteristics to open this up, what you can actually see here, I'm going to go back to my image of the chalks that are in the little box. And so what you'll see here is that at the very top, there's a thing called ICC profile. This is the profile that has actually been supplied for this particular image. This is a JPEG image that I'm sure I got off the internet someplace. So it doesn't necessarily have, the ICC profile is strictly coming off of the fact that sRGB is pretty much the default for any file that's pulled off the web or anything that's taken from online. Anything you're pulling off of that, for the most part, is in sRGB, which is another quick, this is a complete aside to all of this, but if you're actually posting stuff up to your website or to Instagram or wherever else you're showing imagery online, it really behooves you to convert all of those files to sRGB. That is the default de facto color space for the web, and the majority of the monitors that exist out there are actually designed to, most monitors, certainly newer monitors, are capable of showing you the entirety of sRGB. So anyway, it's just a standard, so it's just something to think about. If you put all of your files that your master files, that if you've been through my retouching class or any other class, mostly developing class here, you've been taught that Adobe RGB is the color space that you want to be doing your work in for your master files, and that's true because the Adobe RGB space is much larger than sRGB. However, that being the case, if you then want to take one of your master files that is in Adobe RGB and put it up onto the web. Again, some browsers are better than others about being able to handle the conversion from that, but you're just safer off not to worry about that part by converting your files to sRGB and posting them on the web. So anyway, that's what this ICC profile is about. If you scroll down and click on one of the shots that we've been doing that are outside, something that was generated by a Canon camera, for instance. So I'm going to click on the one that's on me on the outside. You'll see that this thing changes. And you can see that this is a Canon EOS 5D Mark III generic profile. If you click on this drop-down menu, you will actually see there's a whole range of different profiles. The reason I bring this up is that for years, this generic profile was the one that most people went to. However, Capture One has done an entire retesting, a rebuilding of these ICC profiles for cameras. And they've come up with a new one called Pro Standard, and this isn't just for Canon. This exists for a whole bunch of other Canon manufacturers as well. So for me, in this current age and day, certainly working with this version of Capture One, I would change this to Pro Standard. And you'll see there was a very slight shift. Certainly there was something that was going on in the background shadow area that I just saw shift. Let's pick another image right here and try the same thing. I'm going to again change this. So these now are the embedded profiles. So that would be the profile that we just used. And this would be the generic one. Yeah, there's something happening in the shadows primarily. That's where I'm seeing the majority of the changes. But anyway, I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. However, that being said, if you are shooting, for instance, with one of the Leaf medium format backs, you can actually see here, if we come back to this Leaf, so ours is a Leaf Credo 40. If you click on this, you'll see there's not just one single profile for that camera back. Now, in theory, there should be just one single one, but what you're seeing here are profiles that sort of give you a style, a look, a color look. So you can actually use other people's profiles for images. Not that that's necessarily a good thing. If you take a look at this, for instance, this is the Canon 5D Mark III image that we're looking at. But look what happens when I put in a Leaf Portrait HSY5 on it. Look how red the concrete comes behind her. So again, I'm just trying to point out that when you do this, these are the embedded profiles in your image. And again, when you shift to something else, I'm going to change back to, this is again that Terry Richardson picture that I pulled off of the web. So you can see it goes back to that sRGB generic. This is a very different beast than this. I'm going to go to my camera profile really quickly, or to my camera tool tab. In the camera tool tab, remember where it says here under Next Capture Adjustments, ICC profile. What this is this is not the profile of the image that you are looking at. This is what profile is going to be assigned to the next capture. If you leave this set to default, what it does, it just looks at the metadata of your file and just says, okay, this is a Canon 5D Mark III or a Canon 5D Mark IV that shot this thing. We're going to assign that profile to that image. But that is very different. This is, again, this is not the image you're looking at. This is going to be the next image that you capture. Whereas in the color version of this, in base characteristics, this is the profile that was assigned to the image. So if you need to change the profile of something that you've already captured, this is where you do it. Make sense? This curve isn't actually a contrast curve. Again, we've talked about doing this in when we were talking about linear capture. You need to put a contrast curve to change your linear capture to a logarithmic one so that an image looks the way our eyes expect it to look. In most cases, you would want to leave this on auto. Now, there is this thing that is called extra shadow here. In my opinion, all this does is flatten your image out. There's better ways of actually doing this than actually changing the profile curve on this. There's another one for high contrast. Again, I believe that there's much better ways to add high contrast than using a profile to do it. Then there is a film standard. Again, this is just another version of variation. And then finally, there's this linear response, and you'll see that your image gets really dark. The reason they put in linear response is there's a lot of people who do scientific work, specifically people who are using electron microscopes, that kind of stuff. They do not want an image that has been changed from its linear capture to a logarithmic one. They're not looking at something that we would consider to be photographic. What they need is something that is more along the lines of a linear response. So that's why this thing exists in here. I'm going to leave this on auto. I've never changed that. And then finally, underneath all of this, you can see that right now, I originally shot these files, and this should probably be the case with most of you guys. When I shot these files, any of these that I've actually processed or done anything with, it knows that I used Capture One 12 to do the processing. The color engine, that's what this engine, the word engine is about. It's the color engine. And so that's the color engine that was used the last time this was processed. If I want to upgrade this, because again, I'm in Capture One 21 right now, you can simply click on upgrade, and you won't really see a fundamental change in the preview, but the output of this will change dramatically, because primarily that is the major thing in my experience. When they go from one major iteration of Capture One to the next, a lot of it has to do, or a lot of what we are aware of are features that they add. So again, when they added layers, that was a feature. Now they're starting to introduce AI masking and AI selections. That's in the latest versions of Capture One. Those are all feature sets, and those come with upgrades as well. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, that happens between one version and the next are these color engines. They just get better and better and better all the time. Make sense? Okay. So the next thing down is white balance, and in white balance we're already pretty familiar with this. Again, you would want to click on this little eyedropper and come over, and I'm going to hold down my space bar, double click on the color card. Again, if you don't have a color card up right now, don't worry about this. I'm trying to get through this really quickly so I can get to the color editor. I'm going to click on something completely different so that you see, I just clicked on the red patch. So it's putting in an enormous amount of cyan to try to balance, to try to basically make this red thing neutral. And you can see it does actually a pretty good job of it. If we look up at our histogram, our color readout numbers at the very top, you'll see as I hover over this that it's actually very close to neutral. Again, you see I've got a 101 in the red, a 100 in the green, a 101 in the blue, and a 101 in my luminosity here. That indicates that this is actually a neutral color. Part of the reason we're seeing it more as red is because everything around it has actually been changed. It's been added, all the same amount of cyan to neutralize this red has been added. So it's really perverting our perception of this, but this actually, if we were to isolate this away and you couldn't see anything else around it, you would see this is a neutral gray. So at any rate, that's what's going on here. These color temperature sliders, the Kelvin slider and the tint slider, get really confusing to people. I'm going to go ahead and color neutralize this again by clicking on the white patch that's right underneath the red one. So when people look at this Kelvin slider, they think about this, they're looking at this and they're saying, oh, okay, well this image has now got a color temperature of 5,063 degrees Kelvin. That is not what is happening here. This is not a measurement of color temperature. That does not work here. There is no tool that I know of that can actually go into an image and measure out what the color temperature is. You can use a light meter that is designed to measure color temperature, to measure color as well, color temperature as well as tint. You can do that to actually get the sense of, but what this is that this is an adjustment to basically make your image neutral. So this scale, this is not saying that this image was shot at 5,063 degrees Kelvin. It's got nothing to do with this. What this is saying is that we need to change this image to this adjustment to actually create a neutral image. Does that make sense, everyone? So this is not a readout of the color or the tint. These are adjustments. This is very much like if you come into your exposure slider and you actually hit auto on your exposure. So I'm going to come down here and click on auto. You can see that my exposure here has actually been changed by 5/100th of a stop. That change is not an indication of the exposure. This is an indication of the correction that was put onto this file to give me this exposure. It's the same thing when we look at color. So again, this is not the actual color temperature of the image. This is what needed to be applied to this to neutralize this little square to make it a neutral color, a completely neutral gray. Does that make sense, everyone, what's going on? Okay, So that's basically everything that's going on in here. Remember these tools that are up at the very top? I want to just go through them again because you can see that in some cases there's different ones for different. So for instance, if you look at white balance, you'll see that it looks like a magic wand. That's actually the auto adjustment. There's another one that sits right up here in the main tool panel. So if you click on that, what it'll try to do is figure out your exposure for you, and you can see it's actually changed these numbers quite a bit. What it's doing is it's going in and it's looking at the real major parts of your image, and it's trying to come up with a way that gives you essentially some neutral balance in your images, because the supposition is that when you look at any given image, there's going to be neutral colors in there. But it's nowhere near as specific as using the eyedropper tool. So I'm going to click on the eyedropper tool and actually use it. Again, it goes back to the whole feeling that I have about histograms. So anyway, that's what that tool is. The next tool that's over, it's the double-headed arrow. What the double-headed arrow means is this. So I'm going to actually show you. I'm going to pervert something really quick. Oh, we'll actually grab two images. So I'm going to grab a second image out of here. I know I said that we were going to start off with using only the color chalks. Clearly I'm not doing the color chalks part. If you want to do this along with me, which would be great, can you just find the image? It's frame number 6 on mine. The image that's actually got one. The color card's actually in most of these. So even if you can't find this frame number 6, that's okay. I am going to hold down the command key and click on a second image so that I've got two images that are going on right now side by side. So just in terms of navigation, just so that you guys know this, again, it's just these two images that I've got right here that are actually zoomed in. If you hold down your space bar, and you'll get the hand temporarily. If you double click, the image will zoom out. If you double click again, it will zoom in. If you let go of the hand, it goes back to the color white balance tool, the white balance eyedropper. But again, I'm going to hold this again. If you click and you move this around, it'll allow you to move the single image. So that works great for single images. However, I've got two images that are visible right now. So if you add the shift key to the space bar, so now I'm holding down the space bar and the shift key and double click, everybody zooms out. And this doesn't matter how many images that you have selected. If you've got 30 images in the viewer, they will all zoom out. Still holding down the space bar and the shift key, clicking and zooming around, you won't see anything changes because this is full frame. But if I double click again, still holding down the shift key and the shift key and space bar, double click, it will zoom into my image. Still holding down the shift key. Now when I move this, everybody moves. So it's just a quick way to sort of like navigate single frames or double frames. But now I'm going to actually come in and I'm going to change something. So I'm going to come back over to my primary, well, I'll do it on this primary image right here. I'm going to select the red again, and you can actually see it puts in again the same ton of cyan to try to neutralize this out. There's two ways that I can apply this color change to the other image. If you take a look at the very top of your screen, in my case, I've run out of room on my toolbar at the very top. That's what these double-headed arrows are at the right side. If you click on those double-headed arrows, you'll actually see that there is a copy and apply next to it. If we click on copy and apply, we don't see it. So I'm actually going to that's annoying. My screen is actually jammed up because of this projector that I'm actually on right now. So I'm going to show you how to fix this part. I need to get more room up here so that I can see the copy and apply tools that are over here. So to do that, hold down your control key, click on the toolbar, again the bar at the very top, come down to customize toolbar, and it'll show you how this thing has actually been built. So you can see there's spaces in here that have been put in, like this little box right here that's next to the learn tool. You don't need to keep that in here. If you pull this away, it will actually take that off. The Learn tool is simply a shortcut that you can use to get to the very same thing as this user guide that's sitting right up at your help menu. I don't need Learn again, so I'm going to tear that guy off. I'm going to come over to the other side here. You can see I've got two spacing boxes that are over here. I'm going to pull those out as well. I don't ever use this auto adjust, so I'm going to pull it out as well. And now you can see that the tools that got sort of shoved all the way over to the right hand side are now beginning to appear. So I've got that part. I'm going to go ahead and pull out all the other spacers as well. I don't need them. I might as well give myself as much. And then see this giant bar right in the middle? This is also a spacer. We can pull this guy out. Now I've got some room to work with. While we are here, the tool that you should add up here to the toolbar, number one, I always add rotate up to mine. So this rotate, the two arrows that are going in counterclockwise and clockwise fashion, I drag that up and put it actually next to my toolbar, although you can put it anywhere in here you want. But the other one I go for is this one right here. It's the copy and apply single arrow. I actually bring this up and I put it just to the inside of the copy and apply one, and then I hit done. So now what will happen is that I'm going to go old school. This copy and apply is not by default on or a part of this group up here, but this copy and apply always is. What they're talking about here is copy and applying adjustments. So I'm going to click on this, copy, the arrow that points up, and you'll see the arrow that was pointing down was grayed out. And the reason it was grayed out was that I didn't have anything on my adjustment clipboard. But now when I click on that copy adjustments, I do have this now on my clipboard. And then I can actually come to my other image, this image that's actually over here. I'm actually going to come out of this for just a second and just select the other image. And then I'm going to click the down arrow right here. And it applies that color correction to this image here. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. And then I'm going to come back to my original image and the one that I hit to make blue, and I'm going to color neutralize that again. Then I'm going to hold down the Command key and select both images now. I do have a primary right here. It's the one that's got the more solid white around it. Now instead of doing this, what you can actually do, I'm going to go ahead and click on, again, the red patch to make this that super cyanic color. But now instead of doing the copy and then paste, if you click on the double-headed arrow, what'll happen is that it'll actually show you the copy adjustment clipboard. And inside this clipboard, it will show you everything that you've actually worked on. Now, the only two things that I have worked on in here is the camera profile and the white balance. I haven't done anything else, but if I had done an exposure shift on here, that would actually be sitting right here. There would be a little check mark right here, and if you opened up exposure, you would actually see that there is an exposure change that had happened right here. You don't have to then paste everything that's on here. So let's say I do want to paste the white balance. I do want to change the white balance of this image, but I don't want to change the camera profile. You can uncheck camera profile, and now when I go ahead and say apply to this, it will only apply a shift in color in white balance for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say apply to that, and you can see it puts it on here. So it's just a quicker, faster step. But the thing that I love about this the most is that it brings up all of the changes that have actually been made, not just the specific ones that we've actually made on this. You will also notice that those same things exist right down here in the edit part, in the edit menu right here. So in the white balance part, after we go past auto white balance, you do have that copy and apply arrow that sits right here. This is great. This copy and apply up here is universal. It will do everything. This copy and apply that's right here under the white balance, inside the white balance tool, only does it for white balance. These tools that are located within the tools, I mean the little icons that are located within the tools actually control only the tool part. So for instance, this little arrow that's right next to the copy and apply, it's an arrow that goes counterclockwise, and it looks like it hits like a sort of a side of something right here. This is a reset tool. If we click on this, it'll actually say, do you want to reset these adjustments on both of these? And I'm going to say, yes, I do. So that has only reset the white balance. That did not reset everything else that's actually in here. If you want to reset everything that's in here, it's this universal one that's up at the top in your tool panel up here. This will not only reset your white balance, it will reset anything that you've done. So it'll reset exposure, it will reset anything that you've ultimately changed in here. Does that make sense, everyone? There are three little lines that follow this. If you click on this drop down, you can actually see that you can save anything that you've done here as a custom preset. This is a way that you can build your own styles, basically. So you could come in here and say, I really love it when I actually like super whack out this thing massively yellow and then throw in a ton of green. I love this look. This is going to be my new great look, right? This is going to be my color grading. This looks just like every film that I've seen from the 1990s, early 2000s. Has got this shitty green, yellow color grading. I love it. This is going to be my style. So you could actually come to this now, come down to Save Custom Preset. And again, the only thing I've changed in here is the white balance. And if I click on Save for this, then I would name it. And I would call it my 1990s color grading, green, yellow like look, right? And it will keep it forevermore. And then when I would say, so I'll go ahead and we'll call it, so I'll call it 1990s color grade. And I'll go ahead and save this. So then I'm going to reset this one again. So I just come back over to that same arrow, the return arrow, whatever, and click on that and say, yep, I want to reset that adjustment. But now when I actually want to apply this, I can click on this apply right here, and I can come down and you can see my 1990s color grade, and it will apply it to everything. And this will actually live between different sessions as well. So these become universal. So many things we do in Capture One are specific to the session that you're in. Presets are not. They are actually universal. And as long as you save your presets, migrate them from one group to the next, that kind of stuff, whatever, all this stuff will be with you forever. Questions about any of this so far? Then finally, there's these little 3 dots that drop down right here. This basically will allow you to move it to a pinned area, meaning you can move the whole tool somewhere else, to remove the tool, or to get its online help, because you don't really remember what this tool is about. Simply click on the online help. Again, it's the same thing as going up to here and going to the online user guide. The only difference is that this will take you immediately to the section of online help about white balance, whereas this version up here takes you to the table of contents of the user guide, and then you would have to put in search for white balance in the user guide, and you can get there. Okay, we good with that part? So let's try it. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's doing anything for me here in this pinned area, right? So, oh, I take it back. I bet you I know what this is about. If we pull this off, it doesn't give me the move to here because it's completely off. So again, we could click on this and go to online help and scroll down here and see. Yeah, it's not going to give us to us there. So move to pinned area.
Where the layers are.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, what did it do?
So you see where it says layers and histograms?
Yeah.
It puts it underneath there because everything basic color, you can all scroll through all that.
No, I realize that. So, but what is this? It's not even available to me right now. I know I can put this right back in here.
And then you click on that. Put the 3 dots.
Yeah.
And you just scroll there.
Oh, it'll drop it down to the very bottom. I got it. Yeah, that's pretty worthless. Whoever spent their time actually engineering that shouldn't have gotten their bonus. So at any rate, then you'll notice in some others, like this color editor right down here, you've got certain things in here that are similar. So again, you don't have an auto adjustment in here. That's part missing. Again, all of these little icons are tool specific. So, any questions about any of this part so far? Okay, so we're now going to come down to the color editor, and this is where we're really going to spend the majority of our time. So again, in the color editor itself, you can, and at this stage of the game, we do need to go back. So Patrick, do you have this session on your computer by any chance? Okay, all right, fine. If you want to go get another computer and just do it yourself, that's fine. It's up to you. That being said, we'll take a quick break, so that you can get all that stuff and get back. So guys, let's do a quick 10-minute break. So let's call it 5 after 2 if you want to run out. Check. All right, so back into Capture One. So I need everybody now to find that box of chalks and click on that. I would give you a frame number, but I don't think it matters. I've changed the renaming of these so many times. I'm not entirely certain that your names are the same as mine, but we'll be good on this. Okay, so we've already talked about this in the beginning. So these are color ranges. So for instance, if you click on the very first of the icons, so again, I'm in the color editor in the basic sub tab, and if you click on the red tab right here, if you come over and you actually click on this little 3 dots, it'll actually open up a color wheel and it'll show you the range that's actually been selected. The only control that you really have of this range is what they call smoothness. And what this smoothness is that you can see there's a range that sits between 2 axis points right here. And then as it starts to transition away from that, it starts to fade off. This fade off, they call it roll off or fade off, whatever, is what smoothness is. So if you drag your smoothness all the way down to 1, you'll see it sharpens those edges up completely, which means this color selection will operate until you get to the very next color, in which case it won't operate at all. So there's no transition, there's no smooth transition. You're either doing the color range or then bang, you're out of it and that's it. If you want that to be more gradual, you smooth this. So take your smoothness and drag it all the way to the other side up to 15, and you can see those sort of blurry edges that are coming off of this. That's what smoothness is about. So it just rolls off a little bit easier here. But you don't have any way, I'm going to reset this to my defaults, which is 15. You don't have any way to actually control this range other than that. So I'm going to cancel out of here. So that's what these ranges are here. And for basic, quick, down and dirty color control, they actually might work fine. For people who are doing graphics work and you've got really specific color, this might work fine. But this doesn't work really good when you're actually trying to use this to be more discriminatory about it. Now, you can pick your colors here, but that doesn't necessarily apply to something specific. You might say, okay, so like for instance, for these pink chalks right in here, which of these colors would you pick? So there's a way to sort of use a targeting adjustment tool. It's the little eyedropper that sets right down in the lower right-hand corner of this. If you click on this tool and then come over and click on the pinks, then typically you'll see it's still in this red section right here. You can see there's a small little border around that. Again, if you click on this to actually open it up, it's that same range in here. It's come down just a slight bit on there just so that you know what's going on there. So that would be one option. I'm going to click on this blue section to see what happens here. It only is selecting the blues. I'm going to try one of the greens. What can happen here, the reason I'm doing these other selections like this, in this case it keeps selecting just one, but occasionally you will end up with a color that you select that straddles between 2 of these values, and in which case both of these values will then be highlighted and selected. And again, if you're doing only universal selections here, you would not bother to go to the advanced tab to that. You would simply click on the icon all the way to the right that is every color. So this is now every single color in here. So now if we click, say for instance, hue and shift, it'll shift the hue of everyone. If we actually drop the saturation, it desaturates everyone, as opposed to, say, clicking on just the red and desaturating that, in which case you only lose the red saturation in here. But you can see, even though we lost a lot of this, in many cases, we're missing part of the range here that we would want to hopefully have to desaturate here. But that's because we're having to use these canned colors. So again, nobody really uses these canned colors a whole lot, so just so that you guys are aware of that part. So if you go to the next tab over, the Advanced tab, this is where all the heavy lifting is done. And so in the Advanced tab, we don't really see the entire editor. I can't see the entire editor on my screen right here. So I'm actually going to tear this tab off and bring it up to the outside of this and let go and then drop it down here and see if I can get the entire thing in it, and I can. So I just lifted my color editor up in just in the order. You don't have to pull it apart like I did right here. You can simply move it around. So I'm going to bring mine so it sits right under, I don't want it to be under the histogram. I want it to actually to be under layers. So I'm going to pull it down so that layers is still on top, and then I have the color editor underneath it. You can still see I don't see the whole thing in here in terms of the color editor. I don't need to see the advanced part at the very top, but I do want to see this stuff that's sitting right down here. I'm going to temporarily, actually I'm going to get rid of this histogram just to see if I can buy a little more space. So I'm going to click on the 3 dots for the histogram and say remove that tool. And that actually gives me the readout that I'm looking for in the bottom. It's important that you can see all of this, but it's also important that we can still see our layers, because this is going to start to translate to what's going up on in the layers. So the way this tool works is that you need to pick a color point that you're actually going to work on. So you use the targeting adjustment tool or the pick color correction tool, the little eyedropper that's on the lower right hand side. You click on this guy, and then I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on, if we take a look at the blue group that's right in the middle, I'm going to click on the upper group, and I'm simply going to click on a spot that's somewhere right up here in the upper group, right in here. So again, second of the group down in that sort of part. Sorry guys. Hello? I do. Hang on one second. Okay, so now you can see what it's done is it's selected a color range. And so what this color range, this part actually matters. The issue that we've got right here though is you can't really see what's been selected and what hasn't been selected. It gives you an idea on this range right here. But in order to see what's really been selected or not, you come down to the very bottom, see where it says this view selected color range? Click on the check mark right between that. What'll happen is that everything in your image that has not been selected will go to grayscale. Everything that is selected will actually go to, will stay in color. So what we're looking at here is this color range, but this color range can be modified. If we take a look at the triangle that exists right here, what has actually happened is a couple things. Number one, this little dot that is in the middle, that is the exact color that I clicked on. And then what it's doing is it's saying, well, okay, I know you didn't want just that one color, that we wanted sort of more a family of color. And so this is the cone. So the range that you can see in here, this cone part that's actually in here is the part that has been fully selected. And then as you leave this cone part here, those hard lines, and move towards where it begins to fade, that's the roll off. This is what's being controlled by smoothness. So again, if we come down and take a look at our slider here, this that says 20 right now for smoothness, if we crank this all the way down, you'll see it pulls in all of those transitions, and you can also see it really gives you hard drop-offs in your color. There's stuff that's either in or out, and it becomes, there's no smoothness to that. If you take the smoothness and you take it all the way in the other direction, you can see you get that maximum amount of roll-off in here. So it's actually grabbing other colors in here as well. So you can use this setup in here to really fine-tune your what is in part of your selection and what is not part of your selection. If we go back to 20, that's actually the default that starts in smoothness, but that doesn't mean you need to keep it that way. It just needs to mean that's basically what the default is. You can also change the spread on this. So let's say that there are these colors that are right over here, these lighter blue, they're a little bit more cyan, there's not as pure blue as this. That tends to be in this range of our triangle right here just a little bit. If you can click, see the handle that's on the outside? You can click, I'm going to click on the one that's getting closer to 9 o'clock. It's in this lighter blue range, and I'm going to narrow this down so I can adjust that set, and you see it starts to remove some of the color here. Also, if you've missed the central part of the color that you want for your target, it's the next handle that's in here. You can click on that handle and you can rotate this completely around, so you could actually conceivably select a completely different group of colors just by rotating that part around. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, to hopefully bring it back. I'm going to then bring my width out again so that this is a little more neutral. Then the distance from the center of this to the outside edge, this is a typical color wheel, guys. That means in the very center we have completely neutral, desaturated color, gray. And at the very edge we actually have totally saturated color. So if you want to make sure you're grabbing this entire range, the entire saturation, because right now we don't have the least of the saturated colors right here. What we've got is a drop off that's right here. You can actually move this as well. So let's say I only want the most saturated colors in here. You can actually click on that little handle of the triangle and drag it forward, and you can see it's starting to remove that color from the less saturated versions of chalk. So again, if I'm trying to get rid of this part in here, I can actually pull this handle in a little bit more to remove that. I can drop my smoothness down a little bit more to get that roll off gone off. And you can see I'm beginning to really remove all of the color from that, while meanwhile my original target color is completely in space. Now, typically what most people do when they actually pick on a color like this is you want the entire range of color. You're picking a color, but you want the entire scope of the saturation. To get that, if you come down here, right where it says View Selected Color Range, there is an icon that looks like a pie with a small, like a pie with a small wedge cut out. We'll get to that in a second, but the second one over, the next one over, if you click on that, you will see that it actually pushes all of those points out to grab the least saturated of those colors plus the most saturated of those colors. If you didn't want the most saturated colors, like what's kind of happening in here, you can actually grab the handle that's on the outside now and start to drag in, and this now removes the most of the saturated colors. So that's basically what's going on in here. And everything that you do in Capture One, the first move that you do in this is to actually create the color range that you want to then modify. So in our case, again, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Expand It All to give me my entire saturation range. I'm going to drag that highlight color back out again a little bit more to pick up what I consider to be all of, pretty much most of the blues in here. I'm going to drag my smoothness back up to 20, which is basically its default. Close enough. So then this is the color range that I'm actually dealing with right here. So now you can actually turn off this View Selected Color Range, and now we can modify this thing. So for instance, I can take the hue and shift it. So if I do that, you can see I'm pushing all of the colors that were selected more towards the reds. Again, you can see I'm pushing it in this direction of the color wheel. However, you'll notice that this thing bottoms out at 30. Just to keep that in mind, we'll get back to this. I can drag the hue in the exact opposite direction, which drives this now more into the blue or cyanic range here. You can see that that's the shift that's happening in here. I can actually take the saturation and I can push that massively up or completely drop it down, which removes all the color in here, completely desaturates it. I'm going to zero that back out simply by double clicking on it. And then finally you have lightness in here as well. You can actually lighten or darken the areas that have been selected. So that's basically what's going on in here. However, if I drag the hue, again, I'm going to zero everybody else out except for the hue. I'm going to take the hue all the way up to 30 right here. Capture One, unlike Photoshop, does not give you the complete range that you can actually expand something in one step. It keeps it much more subtle. So this does basically 30 positive shifts in tone, in hue, and 30 negative. However, we've got a full 360. So if you want to actually continue to push this further into the reds, you have to select it all over again. So I'm going to then, you'll see right down here on the bottom underneath this, that this like little line that came up, and it's actually showing me the color that I selected. It's telling me the change in hue that I put in here. So I put in a change of 30 degrees. I've left my saturation and lightness at 0. These little triangles that sit right before the H, the S, and the L, that's actually called delta. It's basically the Greek term for it. What delta means is the change. So you can see that by having this at a plus 30, I get a delta change of a plus 30 here. If I zero this back out, I have zeros all along this, so this has been completely unchanged. So it just gives you some clue as to about what you did with this color. So I'm going to drag the hue all the way to a positive 30. You see I'm starting to move more into the reds. If I want to continue this, I actually do another selection of my color. So I'm going to click on the direct color selection tool, and I'm going to come right back over to that same color space that I selected, was this group up here. I'm going to click it again, and you will see that we now get another selection of this. And now again, I'm going to do the same thing. Hue has been zeroed out, and I'm going to continue. And you can see this is pushing this even further into the reds. I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to use my direct selection tool. I'm going to click on that same area again. You'll notice that every sample that it selects looks like the original one. This doesn't look like this really magenta color. Personally, I think it should, but it doesn't. However, if we continue to drag the hue slider over here, you'll actually see this has now really pushed these things into the reds. Now, in my opinion, this is extraordinary color correction. I actually like working in color better in C1 Pro than a lot of times I like it in Photoshop. One of the advantages is that in Photoshop, in order to get to this level of color correction, you're actually in Photoshop, so your raw data is baked and it's actually in there. In the case of Capture One, this never becomes anything but raw data. This is always raw data. This will never change in here. Although I am working on a JPEG though, so this JPEG is baked, but nonetheless, it's a raw editor. It's not a JPEG editor. So, does this make sense what's going on in here? You'll see that, go ahead.
So my question is, like, do professionals really use this advanced color editing?
Oh yeah, wait till you see what this thing will do. Yeah, hang on. We're just scratching the surface right now. So I'm going to come down here. You can see that there's check marks that are actually next to this. If you uncheck the check mark, it turns that control off, or that change off. If I turn the next one off, I start to go back, and if I turn them all off, this is my original image. You can also throw things away, so I'm going to turn these two back on. I'm going to select the bottom one. If you click the minus at the bottom, you can actually get rid of it. I can work my way back. I'm going to click on undo to get rid of all of those, and I completely go back to get rid of all of that part. Is this making sense, everyone? All right, this, in my opinion, is a bug that exists in this, and so I just want to show this to you because this can get really frustrating if you don't know it. So pay attention to this one. We're going to start the same process again. I'm going to click on the blue chalk, the second one down. And typically my move is always to simply expand the range. Again, you can see only the very smallest of saturation is out of this range, and then the very smallest of the desaturation is also out of this. I always click on this part just to give me everything else. While we're down here, just so that you know, the other pie that's got the sort of like the full circle in it, all it is the inverse of this. So let's say that instead of changing the blues, you wanted to change everything else but except the blues. You then click on this, and you'll see that all of the other color range is now selected. So now if I were to desaturate this, you'll desaturate everything except for the color range that you actually picked. So it's just a way that gives you that kind of control. I'm going to zero that back out again, click on the invert selection again to go back to just my blues. But now I'm going to turn on the view color range selected dialog box. You can see my blues in here are selected. I'm great with that. So I'm going to do my hue shift again, the very same thing I just did before. So I'm going to crank the hue shift over, and everything looks like it's working just before. It looks exactly the same. I'm going to do this now a second time, so I'm going to click on that same color sampler area, and you can see at this stage of the game, it reverts back to the original. So now when I click on this expand all and drag my hue saturation slider over, this is not cumulative. This is now exactly the same as the very first step. I'm going to do it one more time. I'm going to click on this again, and you can see it reverts back again to the original range. I'm going to then expand it all and drop this hue. But you can see I can't do this progressively, and that is because this view selected color range has been turned on. To fix this again, I'm going to go back. I'm going to get rid of all of those. I am going to click on this again to show my range. I am going to completely expand my range, but now I'm going to turn view selected color range off. And now when I do my hue, that now completely changes it. But now when I select this new color, even though it's not showing up here as the new color, you can see this did not revert back to its original blue. So now as I start to actually push my color here, it will then continue to do it. So I'm going to continue to select this, and you'll see I can actually push this thing all the way to its complement. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? We good about this part? Okay. I'm going to get rid of these guys. And I'm going to go to the crowns, the yellow crowns that are right here. So if you can find the collection of crowns, that would be great. So in the collection of crowns, we're going to actually go after this part again. So I'm going to select the targeting, pick the color point guy, and I'm going to pick the yellow crowns here. So I'm going to click on the yellow crowns, and you'll see it actually gives me my color range. Again, it's not giving me the completely desaturated versions of it. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and click on the expand my entire range. So this is actually pick this part up. And then I am going to turn on my view selected range. And you can see in this case, it's actually picked all of the yellow crowns pretty well, but it's also picked up some of the orange ones. And I don't want this to select the orange ones. So again, if I turn off my color selection tool right here, you can see the orange ones that have actually been picked. I don't want those to be picked. So I'm going to turn on my view selected color range, and in this case I'm going to grab the slider on my pi control handles, and I'm going to actually grab the part that is in more the orange range right here, and I'm going to narrow this down. So as I start to pull this back, you can actually see that the orange crowns are actually getting knocked out. You'll also see I've got a small amount of green that's on this side that's actually been picked up. There's another amount of it right here. I don't want those to be selected either, so I'm going to grab the green slider up here at the top, and I'm going to start to pull it back to actually get rid of the green part. Now, I've still got a slight little amount of green in there, but you can see I've got a massive roll-off in my green right here. That's because my smoothness is at 20. I'm going to just watch this little green highlight that's actually on this crown right here. I'm going to grab my smoothness and start to pull it back, because that's going to start to pull this green area back in. And you can see that whole part is now actually gone. So now this is a really good selection for all of my yellow crown. There's still a small amount of green down here on this bottom one. So actually I'm going to go after that still. I'm going to pull a little bit more of the roll-off off. And I'm also going to drop the smoothness down just a little bit more to just get that part out. I don't want to attack anything that's happening in the yellow color. So this is now basically my yellow color. And if I turn off my view selected range, I can do all sorts of things. I can change the hue. So let's just change the hue. Again, it'll only impact the yellow crowns. So I'm going to grab this and actually shift it to the green. Or I'm going to shift it in the other direction to starting to move into more of an orange thing here. Or double click on that, I'm going to take the saturation and drop it all the way down, and they actually become white now. The reason they're becoming white is that it's not impacting my lightness at all. It's just impacting the saturation of it. So if I want them to be darker, I would actually grab the lightness slider and pull them down. So this, you can see that the ability to select this stuff actually works out pretty well. However, what's not working out really well for me in this is that these become these adjustments. There's no way for me to actually change a lot of this stuff, except if you look up here at the very top. You can see when I did all of that work up in here, I've got an adjustment layer 1. Do you guys have an adjustment layer 1 sitting up at the very top? Nope. Yes or no? Have you made a change?
It's just got one.
You now got an adjustment layer, and now we're just doing the same thing. back up, we've still got that adjustment part. It's going really there. And then we'll just do it in the adjustment part. So if you don't have this adjustment, if it hasn't been made for you, they sit right up here in this layers part. And you'll have pluses and minuses here. So I'm going to minus all of mine out just so that I can get back and make sure everybody's on the same page right here. So I'm going to get rid of this yellow adjustment by just clicking on the minus. I'm also going to get rid of the center yellow crown. I'm going to subtract that part out. I'm looking at my background. I don't have any adjustment layer part going on right here. So I'm going to click on this plus to create my first adjustment layer. And then again, using the targeting tool, I'm going to select the yellow. Ooh, I'm not going to zoom in. I'm going to expand it completely. I'm going to turn on so I can see the visible part of this. I'm going to choke up my orange part. It's just what we did actually before. I'm going to choke up the orange part to completely get rid of that. I'm going to choke up the green part to get rid of that. And then I'm going to pull my smoothness down to get rid of the ramping that's actually going out to those areas. And so this is actually looking pretty good to me. So this now is sitting on this adjustment layer. So if you come up to this adjustment layer number 1, double click on it, you can rename it, and I'm going to call it Yellow Crowns. Or however I spell shit. Now you've actually got a check mark that sits right next to this, and if you turn this check mark off, well, first off, we need to do something to this. So I'm going to click on the yellow crowns part, and let's change something here. Let's completely desaturate it. So I've completely desaturated. If I turn this adjustment layer off and turn off my view selected area, I'm going to go back to my background and then back up to this area. You will notice that you have an opacity slider in this. Again, I need to turn off the view selected part because all this thing was supposed to do in here was drop my saturation down, but that is not killing the saturation on these guys. What is wrong with you? All right, I'm going to start this all over again. I can get rid of my adjustment layer, clicking on the minus. So now I'm going to click plus again on this. It's actually the active layer. I'm going to grab the crown slider. Expand my range. Turn on my view part. Choke it up. Pull off the smoothness. Oh, obviously select that and then drop my saturation down. And now when I turn this on and off, or go back to my background, it's there. If I bring this part back in here, and then again, I should be able to just kill that. Again, I think this is still a bug with this whole view selected color range part for me to be able to do that because it's not remembering that adjustment here. So let me get rid of this one more time. Add another new layer. Use the targeting adjustment tool to select my color range. Tighten it up. Turn on my view selected color so I can see. Crank this. Crank this. Drop my smoothness down to get rid of the green. I like that. I'm going to turn this part off now and then change my hue or my saturation to drop it all the way down. And that is not desaturating my orange color here at all. I am going to restart Capture One.
Just so you know, I'm following along with you on the same drop.
Yeah. So it has remembered all of this except for the shift.
What's the issue?
Finding out right now. So when I click on this to actually make that adjustment, this thing goes white before I make the adjustment. But I don't have the targeting adjustment tool when I do that part. When I click on it, this goes white. So I'm going to click on this to take it back to orange and then try this one more time. Although the minute I make a change in here, so I'm not going to change any of my range here. I'm just going to change. All right, I'm going to approach this a different way. I'm going to get rid of this. So if you've got layers, adjustment layers up there, select them and just hit the minus to get rid of all the layers that are actually up here. We're going to try this in a completely different fashion. So I'm going to come down and start again. I'm going to click on this to actually select my yellow crowns. I'm going to go ahead and expand them. I'm going to click on View Selected Range, do my expansion, choke this up. And this part's actually working for me right now. I've still got a little bit yellow right here, so I'm going to take my smoothness back down to get rid of that part. That part's all gone. So this is now the selection that I've made. I'm going to come up to my little three dots that are to the right side of the color editor. I'm going to click on this dot and I'm going to come down here and say I'm going to create a mask layer from this selection. So it's going to create a layer. This is now my adjustment layer, and hopefully I've got that mask is actually on it, the one that I made. To see if it's on it, hit the M key, and you will actually see that it puts a red, sort of like a red, well, when you look at mask areas, they do it with a color red. So it's actually putting red now. It's a red see-through tint on the areas that have been masked. It's a little bit confusing for this, but if you put that M on there and click on M, it puts the mask on. If you click on M again, it takes it off. I'm going to put it on again, take it off. If you want to see what this really looks like, because it's really confusing to see it in this, if you take a look at the little eyeball that's up in the very top left-hand corner of the viewer window, there's three little icons. There's a Foursquare, there's a single sort of like frame, and then there's one that looks like it's got an eyeball in the middle. If you click on that eyeball, you'll get a flyout menu, and you can come down here and say, display this grayscale mask, and it will actually show you. This is what we've actually selected in here. To go back to that, to the regular version, click on that same drop-down menu and come down to Always Display Mask, and you can still see it's on. I'm going to hit the M key again to take it off, and then to actually see this in grayscale without remembering that part, The keyboard shortcut for this is Option M. That will show you the grayscale. If you're on Windows, it's Command M. So, but at any rate, this is now on my adjustment layer. So again, I can hit the M. You can actually see it on here. If I turn my adjustment layer off, it turns off. So I'm going to actually turn this back on, hit the M key, and now we're going to make a shift in this. So this is simply built the mask, but I haven't done anything to the mask. I haven't changed its color. So I want everybody to know this part, because these adjustment layers don't apply only to color. They apply to everything. So before we change the color in this, I'm going to come over to my exposure tool group. So again, the one that looks like a histogram, you'll see you've still got this adjustment layer is active in the exposure group. And now I can actually take my exposure and drop it down, and you'll notice that it only drops down the ones that are that have been part of that mask, the ones that were created. This luminosity, my adjustment layer in here. You can also take the opacity slider of this now. This opacity slider is unique to every single adjustment layer. You can have up to like 25, 30 adjustment layers in here. I'm going to take my opacity slider and drop it down, and you can see it's a way to fine tune this part. So I'm going to double click on that to kick it all the way back up to 100%. I'm going to double click on my exposure to change that. We're going to go back to the color editor. I don't have any colors selected right now, so even though I've got this mask layer, I need to reselect my color. So with the color tool selected, I'm going to click on this again. I'm going to actually then expand it completely. But now in this case, I don't need to worry about tightening this up, even though you can see it's actually happening on here, on other parts in here, because these are outside of the mask. The mask is actually protecting these. So then I'm going to turn off my view selected color range, and I'm simply going to drop the saturation on these. And you can see it doesn't impact the orange ones, even though I didn't choke this whole part up, because this is actually being controlled by the layer mask. Does that make sense, everyone? What's going on here? Did that work for you now? Okay. So hopefully this is making sense. And again, I still have opacity control here. I can do other things on this as well. I can still make it darker here. I can do all sorts of, I mean, all the changes that you are able to make, you can still make here. Is everybody good on this part? Okay. You can throw these things away as well. So again, I can either turn it off completely, that would be the change, or I can throw this away. So I'm simply going to click on it to actually toss it to get rid of it. I don't need to see this part here either, so I'm going to uncheck that part or hit the minus to get rid of that part. So now we need to actually move on to something else. Let me look through this thing really quickly and make sure that I've gotten covered all in the advanced part that I wanted to get that done. Got that done. That's done. Done. That's done. Okay, yeah, we're good here. Okay, next thing I want to go to is if you can find a picture of the girl that's on the green screen background. Can everybody find that? I'm going to select the girl, not the one that's actually got the green part in front of it, but her by herself. If she's not looking normal, simply go to your white balance tool. So again, you can collapse the color editor. And the white balance tool is now underneath it. I can click on the white balance and come out and click on her pants, and that'll be fine. It's close enough to my color balance. But I want to zoom into her face. So I'm going to double click on her face, and we're going to come in here and actually take a look at this. So you can see in this girl's face that there are, what can we say? See the red that's actually on her cheek right here? It's really makeup is what's happening in here. I've also got highlights that are happening in here. I don't have a ton of variation in skin tone, but I do have some variation in skin tone here that I would actually like to smooth out. And that's where the last of the color editor tools come in. So if you click this open color editor tool right now, we are not going to do advanced. Again, I clicked on this and I don't need this part in here, so I'm simply going to get rid of it. but I'm going to go to the next tool over, which is the skin tone tool. Now, in my opinion, this shouldn't really be called skin tone. What this should really be called is the refine color tool, because you don't need to only use this on skin tones. You can use this on a ton of different skin tone, on things other than skin. You can do this on grass. You can do this on foliage. You can do this on flowers. You can do it on anything that you feel like you've got color variation in it that you actually want to ultimately smooth out. That's what I'm really going to go for here. I'm going to zoom into this just a little bit more as well. This is actually a better place for me to be able to see what's going on. So you can see I've got variation in skin tone and skin color here. I've got things in here a little bit yellow, things up here a little bit normal, things here a little bit red. So I can control all of this using this skin tone part. It's got this uniform control here that I want to show you guys and show you basically how it works. However, what's going on in here is this is the one color correction that exists in Capture One that does not exist in Photoshop. So this thing actually matters to us in terms of how it works. So we're going to start out doing the exact same thing we did. We're going to actually pick this targeting adjustment tool. But what I want you to do is think about this. What I need to do is, if I'm not eliminating this variation in skin color, I can actually suppress it. So not to completely kill it, but to bring it more in line, to get rid of the sort of blotchiness part that's actually happening in here. So to do this, the trick to using this tool is that you need to pick a color that you want everything else to be. So for instance, you can see on the bridge of her nose up here, there's some really yellow skin here. That is not my ideal skin color. My ideal skin color is going to be somewhere sort of like in this range right in here. I'm looking over at her left cheek. Again, I'm staying away from the super highlighty part. I'm also staying away from the makeup part. I'm simply going to click a small little area right in here. And what you'll see that's happened is it actually gives you, again, this color wedge that's sitting right here and a single point on this color wedge. So what we're going to do on this, I'm going to go ahead and expand my range. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click on that, again, the triangle that's down at the bottom that will expand it to grab all of my saturations. So this is the part that I'm actually working on right now. This is my color range part. What happens now, again, the hue, saturation, and lightness work exactly the way they do in the advanced tab. They're a little bit more subtle. You'll see here with the hue, if you actually drag it all the way forward, it will only shift this in a hue of 5 degrees. Remember, in the advanced version of this, this would go for a full 30. So this is a much, 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 much finer, softer, easier, more targeted control. I'm going to hit 0 to get rid of that part. However, this is not the place that I would actually shift all of the color of her face. This is the only, if I would do that in the advanced tab. What this thing is about is called uniformity. And so what I want you to look at is this. We're going to actually use the uniformity sliders down here. You have hue, saturation, and lightness. What's going to happen in this is that it's looking at my entire range of my image right here. It's looking at all of it. And as I start to say, I want to increase the uniformity of hue, all of the colors that do not match this one little color that I picked are going to start being pushed in that direction. So you can see this area that's got all of this red in it. This is a hue that's sitting somewhere out in this area out here. It's more saturated and it's certainly a different color than this little color right here. So it's going to take the colors that are all out here and it's going to start to bring them closer to this one dot, my target color, what I selected. So if you drag hue all the way up, you will actually see it got rid of all of that red color. It did the same thing for her lips. If you then drag the saturation all the way up, it's going to, again, all of the colors that were out here that were perfectly saturated, all are being moved into this part right here. And then finally, if you go after lightness, this is now, look at her face. There is no variation in tone, there is no variation in hue, and there is no variation in color in this. This is the whole thing that's right in here. That's what uniformity is all about. And it's a great tool to remove the blotchiness and stuff. The problem with the tool, though, is that it's universal. It's happening everywhere, and I don't want this to happen everywhere. I want to be able to control where this thing actually happens. But does the way the tool works make sense to you guys? This whole idea of uniformity? Again, if Photoshop had this, I would be ecstatic. It's a great tool for any of you who have been in my retouching class and you've had to have done the whole, again, frequency separation where you're working with that low layer and you're trying to get these colors to smooth out and you're trying to get the tones smooth out. This is that thing on steroids. It's just, you know, it makes it so much easier. But again, the problem that I've got with this right now is that it's happened to everything. I mean, if you zip back out and take a look, this is actually going to happen to her jacket as well. Her jacket is in this color range, so it's pulling all of this in as well. Does that sort of make sense what's going on in here? All right, so I'm not going to use this for this part right here. I'm going to zero all of these back out again just by double clicking on them. Instead, what I'm going to do right now is I'm not going to actually use this as my color point anymore. You'll also notice down in here, there's no part where you can turn this whole thing on and off. That part doesn't exist. So I'm going to come up to the top and I'm actually going to add an adjustment layer on this. But if you click on the little plus right here and hold it down, you will see that you can do an empty adjustment layer, a filled adjustment layer, and then you have clone and healing layers as well. We're not going to get into cloning and healing layers as well right now. What we're basically going to do is just this adjustment layer. If you click on this new filled adjustment layer and then hit the M key, you will see that you get the color mask that covers the entire thing. This was what was happening when we created a selection using just the yellow crowns. It had built this mask. So this is one of the things that I don't like about Capture One, but it's just the way you need to start thinking. In Photoshop, if you add a mask to something, it hides it, it keeps it, it holds it back. So if you put a curve on that says increases your exposure by a stop and you throw a mask on it, the mask on it will remove that correction from the area that you paint to do the masking. In Capture One, it's the exact opposite. In Capture One, what you do is that everything that is masked will actually shift and change. Does that make sense, everyone? So this is what we're going to do. We're going to actually mask this thing. So then I'm going to then come back. I'm going to hit the M key again to turn my mask off. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to do the very same thing. I'm going to zoom into this girl's face. I do still have that point selected. So I'm going to select a new point. It was this part right about here. I am going to completely expand it. And then I'm going to hit, again, in my skin tone, in my uniformity, all the hue, saturation, and the lightness. So I've now completely knocked all of this out. But I don't want this knocked out on everything. So if you come up to your adjustment layer, we're on this adjustment layer right here, you can see there are icons that sit down here at the very bottom. These icons allow you to control the mask. The first one right here, this tool is actually how you paint a mask on. This next tool over, they call it the magic brush. What this will do is actually look for edges. We'll explore these two in just a little bit. The next one over is a gradient tool. The next one over there is a radial gradient tool. And then the next two are healing and clone. And then finally this last one, which is erase. This will actually erase the mask. So again, if you hit the M key, you'll see that everything is covered here. If we click on this erase tool, you get a brush. If we want to control how this brush works, it's these two little arrows that sit all the way over to the left-hand side. If you click on that, it will actually open up your eraser settings. You can then control the size of your setting. You can control the hardness. You'll see that the double circle right there. That double circle is an indication, again, I'm going to go after hardness again, is the fall off. The little dotted lines that are the center part of that circle are going to be hit fully 100%, but then it starts to ramp down. So this is like a soft brush in Photoshop. If I make my hardness completely hard, I have no ramp down. If I go all the way to 0% softness, I have the most ramp down. I'm going to put mine somewhere about in the middle. You also have opacity and flow in here. We'll get to opacity and flow in just a second. I'm going to get off of that. If you just hover away from that drop-down menu, it'll go to your brush. So I'm going to then come down to my brush. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to again click on this and make my brush a little bit smaller because I just want to paint on her mouth. I'm using the erase tool, and now I'm simply going to paint away from the area. I'm going to remove the mask from her mouth. Now you can actually see that happen on the screen. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and we're going to watch this happen in real time. I'm going to hit the M key again to get rid of the mask. So now I don't see the mask, but it's still there. But now look what happens. As I start to remove the mask, it starts to remove this uniformity adjustments that we've actually made on this. Is this making sense to everybody what's going on in here? I can do the same thing for her eyes. I can do the same thing for this eye. I can zoom back out and do the same thing for her, the top, this leather top that she's actually wearing. Again, I'm going to make my brush considerably larger to go after that guy. And then I can sit here and I can paint on this, and you can see. So this is a way that you can truly control where this happens and where this doesn't happen. That all being said, I'm going to go back to the beginning of all of this. I'm going to throw this adjustment layer away again. We're going to do this. We're going to actually approach this in the completely opposite, well, not the entirely opposite. So I'm going to get rid of this guy to just simply get rid of that. Again, I'm going to zoom into her face even more. I'm going to go after the color smoothness tool. So I'm going to grab the targeting adjustment part. I'm going to click on this part right here. I'm going to completely expand my range. I'm going to, oh, I take it back. I'm not going to do any of this stuff. I'm going to create a brand new layer here first. So again, in this drop-down menu, I can say, I'm now going to create an empty adjustment layer. So in this empty adjustment layer, I don't have anything painted on that. If you hit the M key, you won't see any change at all because there is no mask on this. But now I'm going to, again, click on this point. I'm going to click on the sampler part to go ahead and sample that edge. Again, I'm in this adjustment layer. I'm going to expand my entire wedge. I'm going to then grab the hue all the way up, saturation all the way up, and lightness all the way up. And you'll see that there's been no change in here at all. To get the change, you actually then are going to click on the mask painting tool. So this is the draw mask tool. So if I click on this, again, this will give me my controls here. So my brush setting it's fine here. I can use this brush setting here. That part will be fine. So the most obvious place to see it will be on her mouth. So I'm actually going to start to draw this mask on her mouth, which has these corrections already built into it. So I'm simply going to go across her lips, and you can see that got rid of all of that color in her lips. If you hit the M key, you'll see it's because I put the mask there, and the mask is being controlled by this uniformity part. Does that make sense to everyone what's going on? I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that painting on of that line, and I'm going to change the nature of my brush. So if you click on the flyout for this Add Brush, we have flow control here. So typically when I use this tool, I will crank the hue, saturation, and lightness all the way up, which is the total blasted out and make it all exactly this same color, hue, and lightness. And then I will use this brush, clicking on the options, and I will take my flow way down. So this will allow me to scrub this in slowly. So I'm going to bring the flow down to like an 8 or a 9 in here. Then again, working on this adjustment layer, now you'll see, I'm going to show you on the lips because it's easiest to see it. But now as I start to work on the lips here, this is actually still showing my mask. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Hit the M key so that I don't see the mask. But now I'm just going to start scrubbing on this, and you can see what this allows me to do is slowly work this change in. Now again, I don't want it on her lips, but it's just the most obvious place to see it. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. And then I'm simply going to start working on her face over in here. So I'm just scrubbing along. You guys can do the same thing. And you can see it'll start to smooth all of this part out. So I can come down here and smooth some of this color out. Areas that need more smoothing, you would spend more time scraping on them. Again, I would stay away from all of the parts that are her lower, because you can see I'm getting rid of that sort of mustache shadow. That part's all beginning to go. If you hit your M key now, you can actually see this is what your mask looks like. If you hit the M key again and then hold down your Option key and hit the M key, you'll get the grayscale version. This is the mask that's allowing that part to actually come through on that. You can still work on this mask in its grayscale version of this. I've still got the draw mask part that's on here, so you can see I can start adding to this. I can also grab the erase slider and I can start to erase on this part to actually get this down. So you have all of that control part is still there. Is this working for everyone? All right, hold down Option and hit M again to go back to my regular image. But remember, we still have an opacity slider in here. So let's say we just took this whole thing too far. You can grab the opacity slider for this adjustment layer and you can pull the whole thing back or somewhere in between. Questions about any of this? Okay, last thing that we're going to do here really quickly is going to be color balance. So we're still going to do it on this image. It'll work fine on this image. I am going to get rid of this adjustment layer. I'm not going to use it. So again, I'm just going to select it to make it active. I'm going to click the minus to get rid of it. It goes back to original image. We're just going to work on this image by itself, and I want to see the whole thing. So hold down the space bar, double click on the hand to kick all the way back out. So now I can see the entire image. So in the color balance tool, if you guys can click on it to open it up, what you'll actually see, and again, you can collapse the entire color editor. This is a completely different thing right here. What this allows you to do is control color of specific areas, tonal areas of your image. And you'll see that in the beginning part of this color balance, there is 4 sets of tabs that run along the very top. If you click on the Master tab, what this will do is this will simply colorize everything that's in your tonal range. So if you grab this little point slider that's right in the middle and you start to drag it up to the yellows, you'll see it puts a strong yellow cast on your image. If you click and drag down and go down to the blues, you'll see it'll cast your blues in your image. You can see you can work this around to go to your magentas or to your greens. You can play all of those games. As you start to work from the outside towards the edges, you gain in saturation. If you see this right now, you'll see that there's 2 other sliders that sit on the very outside of this wheel. The one that's on the left is saturation. So watch what happens. I took that center point in the middle and I grabbed it and I brought it all the way up to like around, if you imagine this is a clock face, something around 130-ish or around that range. It's very, very yellow in here. This slider that's on the left-hand side, I've pulled it all the way to the very edge, which is the most saturated it can be. The slider that is in the left-hand side right now is a saturation slider. So if you grab this top point and you start to pull it down, you will see that that little circle is being drawn back down towards the middle. And once you get all the way back down to the middle, this goes back to your original color. So this doesn't mean that you can't do that same pull. It's just that once you get the color, exact color you want, this will allow you to fine-tune the saturation of it. The other slider that's on the other side is not available to you right now. This would be actually a lightness slider. We are going to pick those up in these other versions of color balance that we can actually work with. So I'm going to default this back down to the very middle part. Again, I'm going to drag my slider all the way back so that this is now not having any impact on my image at all. And I'm going to go to the 3-way slider right here. So in the 3-way slider, this gives you those same controls. You can see I've got a highlight control, I've got a mid-tone control, and a shadow control. The problem that I have with these is that they're too small to really effectively work with. So if you really get into doing this kind of work and you really care about fine-tuning this stuff, you want more control. So to get more control, the ultimate control, and this works really well. I'm on a laptop right now. This is not gonna work really well on a laptop, but this works great on a big monitor. What you wanna do instead of using this 3 that are all together right here, instead, you want to click on the shadow slider, and then we are going to drag this color balance off. Then I'm going to come back over to this area that's right down here. I'm going to click on my control key, get on my drop down menu, and I'm going to add a tool, and I'm going to add another color balance. So with this next color balance added, I'm going to then click on midtones and tear it off. And then finally, I'm going to scooch all of this down. I'm going to come back into this area, control click, add tool, and do one more color balance.
I'm not getting the pop-up for the control click where I can add extra tools.
So when you come down into this open area, you control click, you don't get a flyout menu?
No.
Okay, then come up to the tool tab itself and do the same thing. Do you get an add tool up there? Yeah, and it'll probably put this stuff right in the middle, which I hate, but nonetheless. It's just a newer version of Capture One is doing this. All right, so then finally, again, I'm going to click on highlights and pull this out. And so now what I've got is a really big version of what I had going on before. So I'm going to split tone this image. Now, a really classic split toning is to have warmer highlights and cooler shadows, and that's something that we can do here. So I'm going to do my highlight slider that's up at the very top. I'm going to grab the point that's in the center, and I'm going to drag it all the way up to actually warm up my highlights, and you can see it's warming up most of her skin tone, most of her pants, most of what's happening in here are highlights except for her hair. It hasn't really done anything to her hair or to her eyes or for her mouth for that matter. I'm going to do the opposite now for my shadow range. I'm going to grab my shadow range and I'm going to drop it all the way down to the blues down on the bottom. This is a classic split tone. So if we take a look at this now, you can actually see the difference in what's actually going on in all of this. Does this sort of make sense what's going on in here? However, here you also now, you still have your saturation slider that's on the side, but you've also now got a brightness slider. Remember, color works in 3 dimensions. We have color, hue goes around the edge of this, saturation is from the middle out, but what all of these 3 things are missing is lightness. Again, the 3rd dimension. That's what this final slider on the side is about. If you actually click on this, you can drive it to make your highlights lighter. I don't think that's really helping me out. Or make them darker. So this is that control that exists right there. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? And this is the most effective way that you can actually get to a split tone right here. Now, the advantage of doing a split tone, doing it this way, is again, we can save all of this as a style. So if I click on my drop-down menu, I'm sorry, the menu, not the 3 little dots, but the drop-down menu, we can say, I want to save this custom preset. And they're going to say, what do you want to call it? And I'm going to do, sure, it's going to be only for color balance because it's the only thing I've changed in this. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to call it split tone yellow to blue. So we'll call it split tone. YEL-BLU, just so that I have some idea of what it really is. And I'm going to go ahead and save this guy. So then to return this to its default settings, I can actually simply come up to the very top up here, this reset adjustment right here. This will reset everything in my image. And I think this color image, the white balance of this has already been established. I don't want to reset that. What I want to reset are only the color balance part of that. So instead of using the universal reset, I'm going to use the tool specific reset. And I'm going to click on that. That resets all of these guys. But now if I actually want to apply that preset to this guy, simply come up to my little the 3-line menu part right here. And you can see that I'll come down here and split tone yellow blue is a preset that's sitting up in the top. And I've now actually split toned that image. If I come up to one of the images that's actually in the parking lot, and I want to do the same thing, again, this is the image that I've got selected up to those little 3 lines. Come down here and say, I want to do this split tone yellow-blue, and it'll do the exact same thing if I hit it. Make sense? Questions about any of this? All right. Guys, I think we're through most of all of this.
Actually, I have a question.
Shoot.
For all the color balance controls, all the wheel-based stuff, is there any way to plug in numbers to get precise fixtures on that?
So are you talking about like using in Photoshop when you can use the info palette and you can match one color against the other? No. There is color sampling that exists in here, so I should show that to you. We'll see how it works. It might work the way that you think you want it to. I'm going to get rid of this triple color tone thing. The easiest way to get rid of these, if you, again, haven't done any other custom workspace, is simply come up to your window, down to workspace, and go back to default. Then everything in here should reset. So this is basically what the default looked like for the color control panel. So I'm back into this set. I still have my color balance control right here, and I can uncheck my split here. So this gets this back to normal. So if we said that we wanted to actually see what a shift in color correction would actually be, if you come up to the very top of your tool tab to where white balance tool is up at the very top, click on this white balance, you'll get a drop-down menu. And for most of us, we only use the very top one, the pick white balance. That's what the color dropper is all about. But you can do an add color readout, and these things are sticky, and they will stick. They will stay with every. These get memorized into your session preference file. So if you click on add color readout, for instance, we can come here and I can click on her face, and this will give me an RGB and a tonal readout. I can do another one down here. Let's say, for instance, I want to get my color readout on my color patch right here. So this will give me, so again, do you have any idea, just looking at this, if this is correct exposure or not? It'll get here even better. I can come back up to this one. If you hover over it, you can move it around. So I could actually move this around to follow on a highlight on her skin. So can anybody tell me about the exposure of this file looking at these color readouts? Is this proper exposure? Yes or no? What is proper exposure? What should this white patch be reading? 245 to 250. Mine's reading 246. Is that correct exposure? Yes, indeed it is. What about her skin tone? What can you tell me about this? So again, highlight on Caucasian skin, red channel only should be reading 225 to 245. This is reading 233. This is exactly my target. These two numbers alone tell me that I've got the perfect exposure on this image. So then, Alex, going back to what you were saying earlier in here, if we decided to click on this advanced color slider and change this, I'm going to select her skin. We'll go ahead and expand this entire range. I'm going to click on my view selected area to see so her whole face is selected in this. So her whole face is going to be impacted by this. Remember, when you select on this view selected color range, everything that's not in the range just gets made black and white. So you can see her hat's no longer in the range. The wall in the background's no longer in the range. Some of the bricks are, but the background part isn't. So then we're actually going to shift this color. So I'm going to grab the hue and shift it, and we'll see what happens in my color readout. And it's definitely changing my color readout. So this would be the closest that I know about how to get to dealing with that part. To get rid of these color readouts, you would think you could somehow just click on it and hit delete. You can't. To get rid of them, you have to go up to the menu. Again, this pick white balance, the sort of the eyedropper menu part, and come down to delete color readout. And then you can click on these guys, and then again, click on this guy right here, and it'll get rid of them. But I got to tell you, in the old days, I used to do a ton of stuff for Nike. This is the last thing, guys. We're done, unless there's any questions about any of this. Are we good? Okay. Just to let you know, Nike has 4 or 5 studios that shoot all over the world. So one of them is in Ireland, one of them is in Dubai, one of them is somewhere in Asia, one of them is here in the US. It's actually Chicago is one of them. Now they've got another one they've opened up in either San Francisco or LA. So anyway, they're all over, and we're all shooting for the same thing. So what they will do is they will send me a reference file, and let me see if I've got something in here that, let's just say, for instance, this was a set out in the studio here, so I'm going to actually grab this frame right here. What they do with these color readouts is that they would actually do a color readout here, and they would put a point here, a point here, a point on the ground here, a point for her shadow detail, a point for her skin, a point for the shadow here, a point for the highlight here. I mean, they put points all over a single reference image. And then they send that single reference image, they send the entire session, but it's only got one image in it because you need the session to get these control points. And then we sit there and actually we would take an image like this, come up to the image menu, say set this as a compare, and then we would have another image that we are actually shooting in the studio right next to it, and all of these control points are in the exact same spot, and then you would dial your lighting so that you could match the reference image numbers. And that's how they could get consistency across studios all over the world. It's really smart. This is much smarter than Photoshop. Can't do this. All right, are we good on all of this part? All right, let me just make sure that we're good on all of this part. I think we are. I'm not going to kill you guys to death. It's been a long day. I'm actually going to call it right here. Are we good? Okay, great. That is it.